Hi everyone, this is Liberty and I'm here with my colleague Brandon and we're going to discuss Chapter 5 of Mike Long's 2015 book, Second Language Acquisition and Task-Based Language Teaching. In this chapter, Long discusses the concept of needs analysis, so the questionnaire or the information that you would collect before a course starts to know the needs and goals of the learners. One of the first observations is that there is a need for language teachers and organizations to be accountable to learners. And this idea of accountability, I think that he means if I go to you, if I want to learn a language and I go to a school and do a course, I want the school to be able to justify why it's doing certain things and to demonstrate how the course will help me. And I wonder how far this goes, because one of the things he says at the beginning is that he thinks that applied linguists should be doing the needs analysis for courses, which, just from my context, I think that's quite a big demand, that we should get a team of applied linguists to come in and interview every new student.
Yeah. It sounds fantastic on paper. And everybody would love to have a perfectly tailored English course specifically to them. And I do agree with the aspect of it happening beforehand. That seems like, I hadn't considered the frustration from a student side that, and like in your conversation with Arthur about, well, you should know everything. Like, why would I give you as a student? Why would I give my teacher what I need? You're supposed to tell me that. But from my perspective as a student, I would rather come in with the knowledge that I did everything I could to provide that before I actually start taking my lessons. I would rather spend my lessons already kind of hitting the ground running with that information.
Yeah, that makes sense. So yes, so whatever shape it should take, I think we agree that some kind of needs analysis is beneficial, if not necessary. And it's interesting, the quite a long discussion of involuntary learners in the second section. So this would be people who have been forced to change country, or people who are just studying English because it's a requirement of their university course. And I think he puts quite a lot of emphasis on this type of learner. So someone who is just in a situation where they need a language, whether they like it or not. And I had a look. I was just looking for data about why people decide to learn foreign languages. And the app Babbel, have you heard of Babbel? Mm-hmm. So it's an app, I think, like a language learning app. Mm-hmm. And they conducted a survey of 5,000 app users. And when answering why they chose to learn a language, there were they could choose from 9 reasons, and they choose three reasons from a set of 9. And 53% said that they were learning to be able to travel. 46% said they were just interested in the language. And so there was no practical need for the language. And admittedly, this is presumably, these people doing this survey were from affluent countries. I think the European users were more likely to list work or study as reasons to learn a language, while Americans were, would you like to guess? Why did Americans say they want to learn a language?
It has to be travel. I mean, that feels self-focused in a way that feels very American. So, yeah, that would be my guess. Would be travel.
You're close. They reported that so Americans were more likely to be learning just for fun.
Yeah, no, that tracks. That's interesting. So that was all of their users. Travel was the highest reason.
Yeah. So the most popular reason was for travel.
Well, I'm wondering how much of that is based on individuals learning English or learning other languages. I'd be curious those students who attend language schools like ours, where that lands. Because I feel like travel, from my conversations with students, is not the most common. It's, I would say, work predominantly the reason for learning English. Yeah, anecdotally at least.
And it's normally a very general. So they'll say for work reasons, but it's a very general need rather than I am going to be working in this company next year and I need to do this, this, and this. It's more, I think I will have more career opportunities if I study English.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's still a self like betterment rather than a specific need. But yeah, just a general idea that they will open more doors for them.
Yeah, the vagueness of some people's reasons does seem to be a challenge for the idea of doing a detailed task-based needs analysis. Because if you are someone who is just learning out of interest or just because of a vague thought that you might improve your prospects, I don't know how that would fit in to Long's idea of a detailed task-based needs analysis. I think you were also wondering about what this means for general English. I think a detailed needs analysis, which lists tasks, is useful for ESP, so English for specific purposes, a group of doctors who are going to be doing their job in another country, or a university applicant who has been accepted onto an economics program and they need to be able to read academic articles. But yeah, it's not clear how it would apply to the general English student.
Mm. I kind of appreciated the different, because he listed quite a few different ideas of, how did you describe it? Like the reasons for learning that were more,
Extrinsic, external.
yeah, because a lot of them felt, the initial ones were very obvious. The one I noted here that I definitely hadn't considered was like a maintenance. He says maintenance and recovery of ancestral heritage and community language is increasingly popular among this group of learners. Yeah, I don't know if I'm actually answering your question so much as much as where does general English best lend those type of learners specifically, because I think there's a more long-term goal with the general English, but I don't know that would apply to some of these more extrinsically motivated students.
Yeah, yes. From my point of view, those are different types of learner. So we've got the general English learners, and then we've got people who have a very specific goal that they're working towards. And whereas Long is saying most students are actually more like ESP type learners. So he thinks most students do have specialized needs. And I wonder if the way we categorize students is just a product of the pre-existing standards and how fine-grained we are, or how specific we are being about people's needs. And maybe it's just because we've never asked. And maybe if we did take his approach and do a more detailed needs analysis, we would notice more specific needs in more cases.
Yeah. I think too, we could also take from that information like trends and patterns to build on.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I think Long gives an example of, like looking at the previous year's cohort and the types of thing they needed. Yes. And so in the third section, Long goes through a series of doubts posed about the value of doing a needs analysis. So one idea is English is roughly the same everywhere, and the differences between varieties are fairly minor, and therefore you don't need to ask where students will be using the language. Yeah, I think that there is a trade-off between, so because it okay, so if I know a student is going to be moving to Edinburgh, then yes, it would be useful for them to have some guidance in understanding a Scottish accent. At the same time, is it worth totally revising a course to include examples of a Scottish accent when you can get by without it? Lots of people in Edinburgh talk fairly clearly. It's a huge effort to write new material just for that. So yeah, there's a trade-off between the effort of revising material in accordance with the student's needs and the benefit of doing that, I think. Yeah, and then a few other doubts. So another idea is that you should not do a needs analysis, and instead you should just wait for the learners to have their first day and then discuss what to cover, and I guess kind of just play it by ear, and then when the course is over, then you know what was needed. It's a bit of a weird
this is the ex post facto process.
Because it should be both, shouldn't it? You should do a needs analysis before the course starts, and then you should make adjustments after the course starts.
Right.
I think you need both.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but just by itself feels not practical or as beneficial.
Yes, and then we get to the interesting section, felt needs or objective needs. I think in this section, I think he's talking about the place of expertise in conducting needs analysis. I think that this section, it's just the idea. So the objection would be, why do you need experts to conduct a needs analysis when learners can just tell you what they want?
Right.
And again, I think the answer I'm going to be like a broken record. Again, I think that you need both. So people who know about the best ways of learning a language, their expertise is needed to suggest a course or a set of tasks or material. And at the same time, there needs to be input from the learner because the learner has to be on board with whatever is suggested by experts, and they have to see the value of it, and they have information that you don't have about, so a learner will know all of the tasks that they'll need to perform, and they also know they know something about what helps them learn, and that's different for every person. I think he's comparing language teaching to the medical field. And so there are difficult issues around whether medical practitioners can be trusted. And ultimately, but the point is, if you disagree with the doctor's diagnosis, you can ask for a second opinion. And I think that's fair. That's a fair way of dealing with the mismatch of knowledge between experts and learners.
Right. Yeah, I mean, he uses the phrase, to vote with your feet is what students are able to do. Same with patience. It does resonate in that it's far more helpful to see the structure that it fits with you and how you're going to, I keep wanting to go back to the boat metaphor, but not everybody wants the same boat, and we can have a general idea of how everybody works within water. So wild way of saying that. But we all know, maybe most of us understand how to float. At a certain very young age, we can understand how to float in water, but the ideal boat or how we want to be navigating the waters is very different. And I think not taking into account the student's perspective, the felt needs, it is like trying to force somebody into the wrong boat, I guess.
That makes sense. Because, for example, if you are feeling very anxious about being in the water, that will affect the type of instruction you need. Okay, and then the next doubt against the needs analysis is learner heterogeneity. So the claim is that if you get a group of students and you need to deliver a course to them and they all have different needs, and you go through all the steps of doing a needs analysis, and then they're all saying different things, what can you usefully do with that information? And I found this section very unsatisfying, because I think this is one of the strongest objections to doing a needs analysis. And really, this is the reason that I wouldn't do a needs analysis for a general English group course, because there's nothing I can do with that information. It's still going to be the same course. And you could be lucky and you could get several learners saying the same thing about what they need. But if all of them say, or if, two of them want to learn English for work, and then another two are just doing it for fun, and then another two are just want to make travel easier, what can you do with that information?
But you're right. Yeah, they're like, because that was my question. I was like, well, what is this general English class, the ideal that we're looking at? Because there's so many different avenues that if you would have like at least 50-page needs analysis that then wouldn't be any kind of benefit.
Oh, what you mean? You'd have all of this information, but then if you're just going to do a general English course, then
Yeah.
yeah. Yes. Well, yes. So his view is that the course would be shaped by the results of the needs analysis.
Mm.
But yeah, I mean, so my question is, would that really make for a better course? Yeah, I'm just thinking about other schools I've worked in or studied in. I studied Italian for a week in a school where they had a system of on the first day, they interviewed everyone in the class, and there was a placement test, and there were a few questions like, what do you want to study, and what topics do you like to talk about? And I remember there was also a short face-to-face interview, and then on that day they chose material and printed it off and put it in a little booklet for everyone. And in terms of my experience on that course, I think it was just one language point that I noticed would have been selected for me. So it's like, oh yes, I do make mistakes with object and subject pronouns. And so that was one of the things we studied. So was that significantly better than just the general Italian course? Honestly, I don't know, because I think anything I would have done would have been useful. And it was quite a lot of effort for them to have us come in and be interviewed. And so they've lost a day of class from that. So I don't know.
Would you have had a negative experience if that one point wasn't there? If you had provided this information and then none of it was addressed in that week, would you have walked away with a more negative experience, do you think?
Oh yeah. 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 I think at the time I was impressed because they had noticed I kept making mistakes with, it's like the ending of a participle and how the pronoun, how the object pronoun affects it. And I've totally forgotten the rules now, but at the time I thought, oh, that's so helpful that they've noticed I make mistakes with this. So yes, I think that would have, but lots of the stuff that they chose was not for me. It was for other people in the group, and it was stuff I wasn't interested in. Like there was a whole lesson about animals, which I just, yeah. So my point is, there was a lot of effort and a lot of compromises, and if they had instead just done a unit from a course book that's generally useful and generally interesting, I think it would have been quite similar, but then we would have had the extra day of class.
Right.
My point was, in a group general language learning situation, it's much less beneficial. If I was just a one-to-one student, then that would have been incredibly useful, because then the course would be exactly tailored to me. But because it was just a compromise between a group of 5 of us, it was 20% for me and then 20% actually not very interesting. And and it would be the same if you just took a unit from a course book. Maybe 20% of it would be really useful for me, and then the rest would be I could take or leave.
Right.
Yes. So another problem with needs analysis mentioned in this section is that in the case of very young children, their need for the language is not yet known, because you don't know what a child will grow up and go on to do. And Long's response is to point out features of the education system in the country, because one can make predictions about what exams a child would need to take later. So to me, it's a bit of a weird point, because if you've got a group of 8-year-olds and you're thinking about their university entrance exams, are you really going to prepare for that 10 years in advance?
Yeah, and that kind of feels like the answer to that is that the needs analysis would be like general English, like it would be the course book, like, because that's what they would need, because that the course book should probably respond to those exams. So then it kind of becomes irrelevant, right? Like,
Oh, I see what you mean. Oh, yeah, indeed, yeah, because you would just need a one size fits all course for people who are going to take that standardized exam in the future. And so
Right.
there's no point in interviewing the child and
Yeah.
asking about.
So kind of feel like asking them, like, what do you need? School? Got it. Okay.
Right. Interesting. Yes. So the next doubt about needs analysis is the idea that you don't need to know the subject specific activities or tasks that your students need to do. You just need to help them with the underlying communicative competences. It was an interesting example. So he gives the example of doing a course in electrical engineering. And if you take a set of native speakers and they're new to the subject and you put them on this course, then there's a lot of technical language that they have to learn on the job, as it were. But they're able to do that because they have the foundation of language skills. And so that would seem to imply that for non-native speakers, you just need to teach them the language and then they'll be able to cope with the process of learning technical terms once they're on the course.
Yeah, the quote I pulled from this was what is good for the native speaker should be good for the non-native speaker. So the teacher's job is to bring non-native speakers, non-area specific underlying competence up to scratch. Yeah. Not to the native speakers levels, but to levels adequate for them to cope with new information in the area of eventual specialization.
Right.
And
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that seems fair. So it's a bit of a blunt, the solution of just teach students the language. That's a bit of a blunt tool because you could just teach them the language that they will need for that course, and then you save a lot of time and effort, and then they can also see how the course is relevant to them. So yeah, that seems. I think that's a good point. And the next point is Long calls it the dark side of needs analysis, which is the idea that if you just take the information about what job a learner will be doing, and then you teach them just to do that job, then that traps people in entry-level jobs and condemns them to a life of manual labor. Brandon, what is your reaction to this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be very similar to Long's in that, I mean, I think this is like the lengthiest section that he writes on in terms of counter arguments to needs analysis. Yeah, I completely disagree that a needs analysis is something of any kind of malicious intent. I don't know. That idea seems like it would come from individuals who look down upon those kinds of jobs. You know, that is the world we live in, and those are the realities that people face. And I think that for a lot of extrinsic learners, what's going to help them enter this world of learning English is a very specific course of English that's tailored just to them. And I don't know, that the idea that it's somehow by and large like leading English language learners in any kind of social engineering feels very out of tune with the students I've had, at least.
And if Long also rejects this as a doubt about needs analysis, because so I think his position is that of course you should start by learning to do the tasks which are just most basic and most urgent and most practically urgent to you, and you can leave language for socializing to later. I think that's fair. I think like we were saying before, just because you've taught someone to do a certain job, that doesn't condemn them to doing that job forever. You've taught them, and they could probably do it already, but the point is that you're teaching them how to do it better and how to be successful.
Yeah. And it just feels like there couldn't be a better jumping off point for somebody wanting to continue learning English than having those basic needs met. Because I mean, in the same way, it's like I'll have the same students, over several classes. I still write my name on the board. And I think about that as being, it's one less thing. So much of what we're doing is focused on speaking and remembering what certain words are. If they don't have to keep my name in their head, like that's one less thing that just makes everything else if it's a 0.5% easier, that's a 0.5% going towards learning something else in the future. That'll make the next thing easier. So I just found it very funny that this is an argument against it. I appreciate including it for what is probably a very real thing that people may do. But
yeah, I think that's a really good point. If you think about not just the time spent, not just what is learned in the classroom, but about how people's lives will go after the course. And if you've made it significantly easier for them just to get through a working day at their job, then that frees up time and mental energy that they can notice how a customer says hello, or notice a subtle feature of greetings in English. And so if you've taught them the how to do the basic practical tasks in their job, then that is also helping them and leading the way for them to learn other aspects of language.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so that is all the doubts about needs analysis. And the next section, the growth of needs analysis. Long again compares language teaching to other professions. So I think he compares it to a doctor. The first thing a doctor does is talk to the patient and then diagnose them. And engineers and architects will study the client's space and their requirements, and take measurements. And so he's saying, similarly, in language teaching, there is a need for needs analysis. One thing that's interesting about this is I think second language instruction is at the intersection between more vocational areas and academic subjects. If you do a course in history or maths, no one interviews you beforehand to know why you're interested in the subject. You just do the course because there is a conception of how to teach those subjects. And that's the result of a lot of thought and practice. And there's a natural order of topics that you cover. And of course, not everyone needs to do all of those topics in order, but the study of the subject is what it is. And there isn't this perception of having to do a needs analysis. Whereas I think with second language instruction, it's sort of not clear. Yeah, I think some people's perspective is it's more like an academic subject. And then other people like Long view it more on the vocational side. And it makes sense, I guess, because of the heterogeneity of learners. So there are learners like the Americans who are just learning a language for fun, and they're just interested in the language as object. Then there are, as Long points out, there are many involuntary learners or learners with a purely external motivation.
No, I mean, that feels fully apt to my, somewhat limited experience in teaching English and having taken vocational classes as well. Like, it absolutely does, where it's not as rigid and definitely looking at the space around the student rather than just the student itself, like where where their needs are and how can they be met. And I guess that is just to say that makes sense in that intersection I have felt in learning this, being a teacher and like trying to teach English, because at that same time, there is a very clear academic side of it that, I don't know. I don't want to say is at odds with that. Do you feel like it's at odds with those two ideals, or do you feel like because you said intersection, and I do think it exists there, but is it a kind intersection, or is it a fraught meeting?
Good question. And I think one learner could have both types of motivation. So if one is an expat in Thailand and learning Thai, there's the interest in the language itself, or just wanting to know how the language works. But then there's also a lot of practical reasons why you might want to learn. And I think that's probably the case for many, if not most, learners.
Makes sense.
And the view of language as just being so that your learning is purely for utilitarian reasons kind of takes the fun out of it as well.
Yeah.
And like some of the descriptions of courses and like the yeah, so the course for the incoming students of electrical engineering, and okay, so they're going to be on this course, and so we're just going to teach them about how to listen to lectures and how to do their citations. That might be worse than a general English course, which has light and fun activities, but then is also teaching the student a complicated bit of grammar. But then the activities are really fun, and the texts are generally interesting. That could be more effective than, okay, let's look at note-taking skills.
Right.
All right. And then the chapter gets into, I think, long outlines the notions of target situation analysis, or TSA, and present situation analysis. And so I think the idea of a target situation analysis is looking at, for example, what job the student will be doing in the future. And so working out what they will need in that role. I think the main problem with this is just it's hard to predict, especially if you don't know. And it's quite a rare situation that you know exactly what job you're going to be doing in 6 months from now and you do a language course. It does happen. But like you said, people who are learning for work normally are just learning to increase their opportunities, not to do a very specific job. And then there is a discussion of something called the communication needs processor, which was devised by Munby 1978. And it's a quite elaborate procedure for doing a needs analysis. And I'm just going to read from some of this. It's page 101. So it's a multi-step system for doing a needs analysis. The first step is to gather information from students. And so initially about the field for which the L2 was required, or purposive domain, and the institutional or psychosocial settings in which learners would be operating. In other words, where they're going to use the language. Next came information about their communicative purposes, social relationships and roles, and instrumentality, medium, mode, and channel. So in other words, what are they going to be doing? Then followed the learner's current and target proficiency level in different skills and the variety or dialect required. So in other words, how difficult do they find the different tasks that they'll need to do, as well as target communicative events. For example, writing term papers, conducting religious services, or making a sales presentation. So in other words, what will they need to be doing with the language? And then so from this description, according to the this procedure, applied linguists then derive a list of functions or skills, and then also the linguistic realizations of those functions. So for example, from an interview with a student, you learn that they will need to make a lot of polite requests. And so then the skills of using intonation politely and using modal verbs. Would you mind doing this? And then so taking those language items and then putting them into a syllabus. So that's the procedure. And I think Long is kind of semi in agreement with the procedure. One of the problems with it. So he goes through several criticisms. Some people said it was too impractical and too labor intensive. Yeah. And the fact that it's labor intensive, it's sort of, it feels like it could easily just be a waste of time. And just, if you just know something about the learner, you've got common sense and your teachers are responsive to learners' needs as exhibited in the classroom, that's more than enough to teach the language successfully. And you don't need to spend hours collecting data and then deriving a syllabus from it. And I think an even stronger criticism of the approach is this stage of getting all the tasks that learners need to do, and then deriving skills and functions, and then deriving language items, and then teaching the language items. But I think they become divorced from the tasks. And so, for example, with requests, there are many different ways of making a request. Do learners really need to know the sentence pattern? Would you mind verb plus ing? because actually there are lots of ways of doing that. And if you're teaching that as structure kind of in not in isolation, but it's divorced from the task and from the context, something is lost when you do that, because the language items have no meaning outside of the context.
I think I follow.
You're looking puzzled.
Yeah, no, I mean, this was a hard section for me to swallow, if I'm being honest. It was
yeah, and then it wasn't super clear what he was saying about the example of Hasanuddin University.
right.
And so they did a survey, and it turned out that no one was reading anything in English. And so does this mean that they need English reading skills or not? And I think the university then created a plan for getting students to read in English more, with the hope that they would then become professors and encourage their students to read more. He gives in this section, he also gives an example needs analysis. So asking students where they use English, how important are listening, speaking, reading, and writing English for you? Check the boxes below. Yeah, this is the type of thing which I think is not very useful to give to students on group courses. I worked in a school that had a needs analysis very similar to this, and it very rarely gave us any useful information, because it was always, with the different skill areas, it was always a mix. You'd never get a class that unanimously wanted one skill over other skills. And then in the section about why are you learning English, it was always just something incredibly generic, like for university. So yeah, so it was not very useful.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Getting almost through the chapter now, but so he has a section, it's the 5th section. He makes an argument for why tasks should be the unit of a needs analysis. And so one point is that the learners or the stakeholders, so they don't have any expertise in language or language learning. They do know the tasks that they need to know. And then with teachers or applied linguists, it's the opposite. So they've got lots of language awareness, but they don't know the tasks that learners need to do. And so that would seem to imply the information you collect should be about the tasks, because that's the information that you're lacking. Which makes sense. And I like this section as well, because he gives, on this page 109, he gives several definitions of tasks. So the word task is used in different ways by different people. Yeah, there's quite a range of different definitions. So I'll read one. He quotes several people. Candlin, for example, defines task this way: one of a set of differentiated, sequenceable, problem-posing activities involving learners and teachers in some joint selection from a range of varied cognitive and communicative procedures, applied to existing and new knowledge in the collective exploration and pursuance of foreseen or emergent goals within a social milieu. And there are a few similarly convoluted definitions, but I love just the contrast between those at Long's definition. So Long's definition, a piece of work undertaken for oneself or for others, freely or for some reward. And then final sentence of this: tasks are things they will tell you they do if you ask them, and they are not applied linguists. So yeah, it's just the things that you need to do in your day-to-day life. So weighing a patient, sorting letters, making a hotel reservation, writing a check. But I guess, so one question I would have, if tasks are viewed in that way, and your view is, so you've got to help the learner do all of those things. Some of them do involve a lot of language use, but some of them really don't. And so I wonder how useful that information is. And if you're bringing in this heavily practical component into the classroom, and then maybe students. So there was an example in another paper that I read for this it was I and Arthur in our first episode. We read a paper by Dick Allwright. There was an example of a group of learners who had to, I think, design a plane from some cardboard material, something like that. And or like, could they write an instruction manual for designing a plane? And so some of that task would involve language use, but then lots of it, so actually assembling the plane, you might just be sitting and doing some assembly. And so I just wonder if that's always a good use of classroom time.
I mean, that's a very good point that I don't, because I think about some of the task-based lessons that I've done that have felt very limited in the amount of English that can come from them, even if it is very beneficial.
Right. Yeah. He also brings up the distinction between focused and unfocused tasks. So a focused task is one which is designed to get students to use a particular language item, and you can set up the task and then monitor for use of the language. So, for example, if students have to choose the best room to rent, you might think, well, so that lends itself to using comparatives. And so you do the task and then monitor for use of comparatives and then teach comparatives. So that everything is building up to you presenting a language item. Whereas an unfocused task, you just get learners doing it and then just see what's difficult and then help them with whatever's difficult. So yeah, did you have thoughts on that section?
He mentions in one of the definitions how the task should have this is from Noonan, but the task should have a sense of completeness, being able to like stand on its own. That just stood out to me as like where I've seen tasks work and not work as well. I think that sense of completeness feels I don't know if required, but very beneficial into having students take away a sense of learning something from the task.
Is that does that mean that there should be a clear outcome? Like a clear end?
I don't feel like it has to be an outcome, but a takeaway, an understanding of where this sits in their world, and not, here are your lines, here are my lines. Okay, now we've been actors for a moment, or we've made airplane, and that's great. But
so there should be a clear like beginning, middle, and end. Yes, I think I know what you mean. I think it's difficult because lots of tasks in real life are not really like that. There are just very brief interactions that people have, and I think it's not always easy to design classroom activities around those. Okay, and getting to the last section. So the last section is about means analysis. So this is all about just the limitations that are faced when, I think, deciding what to do with a needs analysis. And one of the kind of recurring challenges of Long's approach is bringing learners and stakeholders on side. And because learners often come from backgrounds of traditional classroom instruction, and task-based language teaching is very different from that. And so they need to be persuaded of the approach for it to be successful. I think that's one of the main benefits of doing a needs analysis, that you know where learners are coming from. So you know about their previous experiences of language learning, and you know about their attitudes. Because even if you cannot fully persuade them of task-based language teaching, at least knowing where they're coming from and finding a compromise. And so, yeah, and giving them a bit of structured grammar instruction, but then also getting them doing more communicative tasks. Yeah, I think it's much more likely to be successful if you know where learners are coming from. Okay, shall I make some concluding remarks?
Yes.
Okay. I think that Long has persuasively argued for using a task as the unit of analysis, even if there are difficulties with that. He has persuasively argued against most objections to the very idea of a needs analysis, but So for me, I think he has not successfully argued that we must be doing a needs analysis with every student, especially when it comes to group courses, and especially for groups of students who do not have specialized needs. And he says that most students have specialized needs, and I would honestly question that. And it could just be because of our context. So in our context, most students are just people who are kind of here for a while. They need something to do for a month, and they like to travel, and they want to develop personally. And so it could well be true that that is not the average language learner, and the average language learner is someone who is just thrust into a situation in another country that they don't particularly want to be in, and they need the language just for practical reasons or just for an exam. Yeah, I'm left with that question of how these ideas apply to my context. But there are 8 more chapters left, and I'm leaving it as an open question.
I think that is actually also after this conversation, I'm in the same place because I having read it, I was more convinced, but I think that was coming from an overly idealized imagination of what a class can be or could be. And having had this conversation, I also agree that I don't know that it would always guarantee a better experience for students, whereas it could be just unneeded data. Honestly, that wouldn't be as helpful.
Mm. Yeah, yes. I think if you're going to do a needs analysis, then you have to also know exactly what you will do with the information, which I think will be the topic of chapter 6, which is about identifying target tasks. So I think we will end this discussion, and we will see what he has to say about identifying target tasks. Brandon, thank you so much for another discussion, and thank you for listening, and see you next time.